I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Michael Jansen is Chief Research Guru at Everest Group. As co-founder of our research practice, Michael offers profound insights and analysis to enterprises and service providers alike. He is particularly well known for his ability to hypothesize clever and challenging ideas based on his fact-based insights across business and IT processes, sourcing models, and industries. Shirley Hung, Vice President Research at Everest Group, advises senior stakeholders of global services, including enterprises, service providers, and investors in their strategic mandates and initiatives. Her responsibilities include leading Everest Group's research in the areas of finance and accounting, outsourcing, procurement outsourcing, and customer experience management services. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael. Take it away, Michael.
All right, thank you, Joy. And I'm here live with Shirley. We're sitting side by side here so we can have a conversation. What we're going to do today is take you through three main agenda points. We're going to talk about the 2019 business challenges as we've gathered them from the enterprise side of the equation. We're going to talk about some of the responses to those and focus on digital. And then we're going to talk about the 5 key buying challenges within digital. So we're really trying to zero in on how are things changing with respect to buying digital. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end here. And certainly feel free to submit your questions along the way, and we'll try to answer them as in the flow of things if possible. So what we wanted to do is start out with a quick poll just to kind of get the temperature of this audience and the temperature in real time here in terms of how confident people feel right now. So we wanted to open up with a quick poll here talking about how you are feeling about hitting your 2019 targets. You know, compared to 2018, which I think generally most people would say was a really, really good year, except for maybe just the very end of the year when we lost some steam on the stock market and some confidence with some business issues. But how do you feel about 2019? So we got the poll open. Go ahead and enter your answers there. Are you much more confident? Are you more confident? Are you neutral, less confident, or much less confident? Okay, I can see we got about half the audience now has participated, about 60%. Okay, all right, we'll close it in 5, 4. Okay, we just closed. Okay, great. So if you can see the screen there, you can see that the more confident is the dominant response, and that's good news. I mean, I think people are continuing the trend from 2018, looking at it and saying, hey, we've got some good things going on with our businesses. And generally, I think this number we used was a bit higher at the end of the year, and as we've gotten to the year, I think it's moved down just a tad, but it's not. I wouldn't definitely not call this a dismal number, or you know, people are extremely worried about their businesses. So let's go into that context here with our first slide. Right. Okay. So at the end of 2018, we asked enterprises what they were thinking about 2019 in terms of the biggest business challenges. And I'm going to show you data in a couple of these charts here, but I want to just provide context to the 3 issues. So the disruption in the business models. And I think, you know, I don't know that 2018 or 2019 created a new set of technologies or new business models that were so disruptive that everybody had to, you know, change their business plans going forward here. I think we have more continuation of things that we've been seeing gathering steam. I think we're reaching tipping points, and I'm going to show you a couple of charts specifically in the retail where a tipping point was reached in that sector. But I think most people know what needs to be done, and they're busy trying to figure out how to make that happen and trying to do so before they run out of runway, before the changes are, you know, the changes and disruptions become so chronic that it causes business to fail. The second one here is on talent and skill shortages. And, you know, I'm going to reference back, you know, 20 plus years of talking to senior executives. And I will tell you that talent and culture and talent and culture are always the number 1, 2 issues. And generally what the conversation goes, if I get the right talent on there, if I find the top talent for my organization, if I can do that, then I can get any technology implementation. I can make any business change. I can make anything happen in the organization if I have the right people and the right culture. What's changed in this conversation is, especially in the US and in Europe, is now it's moving from a conversation of not just top talent, but it's also moving about just, hey, how do I get arms and legs? How do I just get bodies to fill organizational slots that we used to think we had lots of applicants for? Now we're not finding that, and I'm going to show you some numbers on that. And then the last one here, the pricing and cost pressure, and I think that's really a result. There's two things that are causing that to happen. One is the tariffs, and so that's causing a ripple in the whole ecosystem of or the economy in terms of, is that going to impact my business and by how much, and could it change tomorrow? But I also think that we're also seeing the talent shortage cause labor costs to rise, at least here in the U.S., significantly. So I think we've all kind of seen the de facto minimum wage move from, $7, $8, $9 an hour to 12 to 15, and I think we saw that with Walmart and Amazon and Target all announcing wage increases. Their new minimum wage is now 12 to 15, and that's going to have a big impact throughout the retail sector, and I will guess even further through other jobs in the market too. I saw a note a couple of weeks ago where it said that the new truck driver salary at Walmart now is $87,500, and I kind of think, hey, that's a big number, especially if you're thinking about, hey, should I go to college and come out of there making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, or should I not go through the whole college experience, not get the college loans, and should I just go straight to truck driving and never have to worry about putting on socks if I don't want to? So, I think those things are going to come into play here. But I should promise you some data. So let's go to the next slide here. And so this is a kind of a bird's eye view of the retail segment here in the U.S. And what we've done is captured the store closures year by year. And if you look across the numbers here, you're going to see an average of 3,000 to 4,000 stores being closed each and every year. And that's going to mainly be because of, hey, I didn't execute well, I was behind the fashion, somebody came up with a new concept that we weren't able to react to. There's always going to be a little bit of churn in the number of stores that are open and closing. If you look back in 2008, you're going to see the financial crisis, which bumped the number up to 7,000. If you look at 2017 and 2018, you see something that's distinctly different. And in the backdrop of having some very good economic numbers, and the economy's moving ahead at full steam. And so if I push the next key there, you're going to see something we call the Amazon effect. And so we've been talking about Amazon for more than a decade. And so if you look here, you'll see Amazon's revenues in the blue bar starting to increase. But what I'm trying to point out or the point I'm trying to make here is that we reached a tipping point with Amazon. We've known about them, we've understood what they're doing, nothing that new in the last year or two, but look what happened to all those store closings. And I heard a statistic just a couple days ago that so far, I think there's close to 4,000 stores that are already announced closures, or closures that have been announced for 4,000 stores already in 2019. So the point I'm trying to make there is there's a lag effect. And we see the same type of potential impacts in financial services, so some of the new fintechs. But I can't really say, hey, there's been lots of banks closing because of all these new fintechs that are rising. But I think there will be a tipping point for that industry. Is it 5 years down the road? Is it 4 years down the road, or 6 years down the road? I don't know. You can say the same thing with healthcare. Lots of new healthcare solutions popping up. Will there be an impact to the existing business models? Probably. It may take a little longer because there's so many embedded regulations and practices in that segment. But again, my opening comment was the disruptions take a while to have an impact on the overall business, and businesses are very conscious of that, and do they have enough runway to make those changes? The statistic that I really like to point to, and I talked about the talent shortage, and I bring this chart into play here because people, hey, we all know the unemployment rate's getting better. We've all heard at least here in the U.S., we've all heard about, hey, we need to get more jobs and things like that. But when I bring up this chart here, and this chart is really focused in on the number of unemployed divided by the job openings. And if you look back a decade ago when we had our recession, you'll see that there were almost 700 people looking for every 100 job openings. And so employers had lots to choose from. They had seven, on average, they had 7 people looking for every opening. If you roll that forward to today, the tables are turned completely. And what you'll see there is now we only have 90 people looking for work for every 100 jobs. So that's where Amazon and Walmart didn't come out and say, hey, we're willing to pay $12 to $15 minimum wage in our stores because they wanted to. It's because they had to. And so that's going to ripple through our society. And I'd even say it's worse than these statistics actually represent. So if I said 90 are looking for 100 jobs, I think there might be 90 on paper that are looking for jobs, but I'd also suggest that not all 90 of those really want jobs. I think some of them are going through their motions because they told their mom they would do that, or their spouse that they would be out there looking for a job, but they said, no, I don't really want it. I'm happy with not working. Or there may be another set that they're looking for unemployment benefits.
Yeah, so I think, these statistics are obviously at the aggregate level as well. So if we were to kind of peel the onion a bit further and start looking at some of the more hard to find skill sets within the technology skill sets, analytics, and so forth, then it starts looking really, really dire, right?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes much more dramatic. In fact, I saw some statistics in my mailbox this morning that we're going to use in future presentations they're going to tell even a more chronic structural story in things like IT. I think you're right. So Shirley, let's look at these things from a spend standpoint.
Yes, so we did take a look at and asked organizations what buying centers are they planning on increasing the budgets for? And we thought that it would be interesting to take a look at the responses between the enterprises and the service providers, see if there's any kind of major differences. And what we found is that on a whole, there are, and can we click there we go. So on a whole, the chief digital officer and the chief marketing officer, as well as the technology heads of business units, are all gaining in terms of budgetary influence. And this is on both the enterprise side and the service provider side. This is especially interesting in light of the fact that up until a couple of years ago, there was no such thing as a chief digital officer. Right.
Yeah, I think that very interesting. And we're not saying that the CIO is unimportant here. We're just saying this is increase in spend, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's increase in spend. What organizations have said are amongst their top 3 priorities. And to your point, even looking at GBS and shared services, around 25% of the organizations we talked to said that was amongst their top 3 priority buying centers. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the role of the chief digital officer, I think it's more of a concept than an actual defined role that's the same in every organization. I think it's more focused on how do I take the technology and bring a business aspect to it, whereas the traditional CIO role has been focused on infrastructure and apps development and getting the infrastructure in place.
That's right.
To enable the technology. And so I can tell you that when I talk to chief digital officers, that some of them are very powerful and some of them are still emerging. So I think, there's still to be, the story has not been fully written on where the role of the chief digital officer, or we call the technology head of business units, how that plays out over the next few years.
Completely agree. Great. Well, in the next section, we'll be talking about how digital can be a lever for this. So if we could flip to the next slide. Michael just went through quite a bit of detail around, why these business challenges are there and what should organizations really do about it. The main response levers really revolve around 3 things: talent, digital, and sourcing. So I've seen, around talent, I've seen statistics where about 50% of employees who enter the workforce these days are expecting to stay in their job for less than 2 years. This makes attracting and retaining talent, as well as eliciting the best out of your workforce for the time that they're with you, to be absolutely fundamental for business success. Around digital, the adoption of digital will be, vital. I think we all are in agreement on that, and we'll get into this a bit deeper in the rest of the presentation. And of course, there will be implications on how you source your services. we've been seeing that in this digital world, things are moving closer together. They're becoming more intimate with each other and basically converging, whether it's data, activities, technologies. So organizations will need to revisit their sourcing decisions. And when they're determining what is the most appropriate sourcing models, organizations will need to think about the technologies that are used and the skills that are required.
Yeah, and when I see us talking about digital, there is certainly the business model aspect of it, but I also look at it as a key response to that talent conversation as well, because if you can't find the resources, you're going to need to make your existing resources that much more productive if you want to continue to grow the business.
Yeah.
So it becomes an imperative of survival as well as opportunity.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on. As we go into the next section, we're going to have one more quick poll here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those digital technologies. And so we're not going to try to get all the different technologies, but just want to get a sense from you of the top 2 digital technologies that you and your organization are investing in. So is it automation, RPA? Is it some of where the advanced AI, big data analytics, blockchain, cybersecurity? Just plug in your vote there. Okay, got about 1/3 of the respondents in. Give it another few seconds here. All right, almost half. So the top 2 that you have in organizations. All right, we'll close out the poll. Okay, so this is going to be consistent with what we're going to show on the next slide. Pretty consistent anyway. The automation RPA is certainly on the top of the list here. 75% of you have that in your top 2. Big data analytics is coming in number 2, with advanced automations. The advanced automation is actually starting to be an increasingly large number here as I observe that. The one that's on the small there, the blockchain, you guys got that right in terms of, we're going to show you a broader view of that of those numbers here in just a second. So good consistency. I think people are looking at this in terms of, how do I take the things that have the most commercial appeal in terms of driving improvements to both the workforce and the talent, or the talent and the customer experience. All right, so Shirley, show us what we found in the data that we collected at the end of the year.
Yeah, so similar to the previous kind of graph of this type, the enterprise priorities are showing up across the y-axis, and the service providers priorities are showing up on the x-axis. So consistent with your feedback in the previous survey, we are finding that big data analytics, basic automation such as RPA, and cloud solutions are amongst the top areas where organizations are investing. And to Michael's point, these technologies have broad utility. The next set of technology that's attracting investment is in the areas of mobility, cybersecurity, and advanced automation, where we start adding in elements of AI, such as machine learning and cognitive and natural language processing. And these areas are a bit more specialized in terms of their use. They're attracting a bit more interest on the enterprise side as opposed to service providers. And the last piece, which I like looking at, is blockchain, where it's kind of at the bottom left-hand corner. There's a lot of hype about blockchain. At this point, it looks like it's more hype than reality, because its application is more niche. Its value is dependent on the industry and the process.
Yeah, so you're really into an industry ecosystem, like where the category captains really get to drive this show more so than just anybody can do it.
Yeah. So I think there's great potential and opportunity for blockchain in areas such as supply chain, but the scalability and their security concerns around it, at this point, it's still more proof of concept than mainstream.
Yeah, I got a briefing just a couple days ago on some of the latest the latest computing technologies, and so we start to think about where we're going to go with some of the new machines coming out there. That's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think as well, just one last point on blockchain, there's not a great deal of understanding yet on what it even is. I was in a meeting yesterday with a bunch of sourcing professionals, and I would say that probably half the room don't even really know what blockchain is as a concept. So, so it's definitely an opportunity that's there, something to keep an eye on. But it's not hit the main stage in the same way that we have seen RPA.
Yeah, I was referencing quantum computing, and quantum computing would be, that was like an interesting technology, but again, it started out very niche, I think. All right, so let's look at what we've done is we've put together something we call our digital capability platform, and what we're trying to do is answer the question, what is digital? And this question has been around, is it digital? What is digital? We're not the first people to answer that. We're not going to even pretend to be. When I was looking at this, I said, people started using the word digital. I was thinking, oh, well, didn't we go digital with our cell phones 20 years ago? But what we're trying to do here is show you the expansive nature of the solutions and the vendors and some of the things that are coming to market, and try to put that on one page for you. So it's not that this is all new. This is just trying to bring it together in one picture for you, and then we'll talk about the implications here from a buying purpose. So in the first layer here, what we're going to do is we start out with the performance layer, and we're really looking at those solutions, those digital solutions that are geared toward driving scalability and performance. Then we bring in the next layer, which is really about the process automation. It's really about the business software, it's IT. It's really about driving process efficiency. And you saw the high numbers that we had in the previous slide on RPA in the automation. The next layer gets into driving decisions. So you get into your business intelligence, your analytics, process mining, and then the final layer is really the interaction layer, really about driving the stakeholder experience. Now, if you see it along the edge of the chart there across the layers, we have something called cognitive or artificial intelligence. We do think, there's lots of chatter around that. What is AI and how is it impacting? We do think it's going to be a significant impact across many of these layers, actually. So that's why we kind of put it across layers. It's going to be the next thing that'll enhance the outputs in each of these four layers as we look at it. And so as the vendors and provide new technologies and service providers provide new solutions around this, you'll continually hear more of this, but it's not necessarily a layer by itself. It's not a technology by itself. It's in addition to these four layers, so it augments these things. Okay, now so this is a kind of, think about that as the taxonomy, and then we start to look at this from a buying standpoint. This is where it gets really interesting in terms of I like to refer to how our enterprises are doing this. I often refer to it as a digital disaster. And so when I look at this and I say, hey, you can buy this in many different ways. You can buy this in the context of a specific process or specific node on the overall digital capability platform. So you can buy RPA by itself. You can buy it as an entire layer. So if you bought your robot software back in with the RPA vendor, but you can look at it and say, hey, listen, I don't necessarily need a call center solution. I need a contact or employee or customer experience capability. You can buy that entire layer. You can go beyond that and buy it as an entire, hey, what am I doing as an overall BPO solution that might include multiple layers, multiple pieces of technology, along with the labor to go with it. Or you can look at this and buying this as an entire business process platform, as an entire BPaaS solution. And so my point is, when you look at this, I suspect this is happening in your organizations right now. And that's why I refer to the digital disaster. If you look at this picture, nobody in the organization is in complete control of this. There's certainly going to be aspects of the digital technologies that are coming from and being delivered by functions. So hey, I need to make my accounting function faster, better, smarter. It could be that it's coming from your shared services organizations. Hey, they're trying to provide better services to the internal organization. It could be coming from a biz ops area, saying, hey, we need to improve our operations. Or it could be coming from an IT, or more likely, it's coming from all of those organizations, all competing inside with nobody really in charge. and everybody providing improvements in there. And I think over time we're going to find that while that was very good that everybody's doing these digital projects, there's going to be a certain cost in a contra productivity perspective when you start to bring all these things together in a non-coherent methodology. On the next slide, we're trying to show you the same digital capability platform, but in a specific context. And so what we've done here is focusing on the claims management for auto insurance here. And we've got the same 4 layers as you go up the layers here, but you'll see that we're putting a contextual conversation. So we're doing the same kind of, don't do the generic, but talk about the specific. So you can talk about fraud detection, claims management. You can talk about the loss leakage. You can talk about the different analytics that are available in each of these capabilities. My point with this is, what are you doing for your organization? How does it apply to you? And if you, and we're here to kind of help you on that conversation if it makes sense. Help decipher all the different individual vendor solutions as well as the overall combined solutions. All right, so let's move into the 5 challenges. And so I'm buying this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them all on the screen at one time, and we're going to talk about the first challenge is the number of vendors in each segment is overwhelming. I alluded to a little bit. The ownership of digital execution is not clear. The changing outsourcing and insourcing mix, and then we're going to talk about the current pricing models becoming obsolete, and then we'll talk about the changing the technology and vendor landscape changing very, very quickly. All right, so I've highlighted the ownership issue. We're going to do a quick poll on the next page. Let's start with that. And so our question to you is, who owns digital execution in your organization? And we're going to force the conversation. I've already kind of tipped my hand. I think it's owned by several folks, but who do you think owns it the most in your organization? Okay, I'm looking at the numbers as they come in, and we got we had a horse race there. Now we got a leader. Got a third of the folks have voted. Okay, almost half. We'll give another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we'll close it out. Okay, I think my point is proven here. Who owns it? Interesting here that the business operations actually has the #1 role, but you see a split between the CIO and the CDO. And so if you add those two together, you're going to get a bigger number than any of the other responses. Shared services and the functions are fairly low, though I can tell you there's lots of things happening in those areas as well. But from a leadership standpoint, business ops and the IT, with a split on the IT between the CIO and the new emerging or continually to emerge CDO. So interesting there. All right, so talked about this a little bit. I'll just augment this conversation with just a tiny bit here, and Shirley can chip in here if you want. The whole idea of who owns this, the HR, the IT, the business ops, and GIC shared services, I think continues to be a challenge. And the examples, I like to use the RPA example because I know what's happening there specifically. And in the case of RPA, I get this question from procurement and organizations all the time: is how is this thing evolving, and where's the market looking like, and how do we buy it? And so RPA is not something that's actually new. It's been around for quite some time, and it's been called different things, but it's just in the last 2 to 3 years where we had a breakout, a couple of firms and a breakout concepts get a lot of attention in the enterprise. In fact, you could call RPA just macros on steroids. But what they did in a couple of these RPA firms is they changed that paradigm, or they changed that marketing of that to be more about, hey, how do we get to create this digital workforce? And they created all this imagery and all this conversation about how the digital workforce is going to save the day, or the digital workforce is going to help make your workforce more productive, or the digital workforce is going to be there to replace workers. That one hasn't proven to be as hasn't been as, the promises probably haven't been quite there as they originally tried to say, hey, this is, the digital workforce is going to be really cheap, and they never go to sleep, they never stop working. But as a whole, they were created success of getting into many, many different organizations. And so you can safely say that every one of those organizations on the chart right there have done some kind of projects with the RPA and created their own digital workforce. So I think, the challenge there is there's a need to bring all those things together into like one coherent policy. And how do we stop the rogue robots that are being created in the organization? How do we stop those from becoming prolific? How do we stop them from becoming more of a challenge in terms of security, in terms of backup and recovery? How do we keep them so that they're not conflicting with other IT components?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the problem with many of the digital projects are that they're, software as a service based. They require little to no capital. We hear things about people buying RPA licenses with their credit card, right?
Yeah.
Anybody and everybody can essentially create their own initiatives. And in my previous role, I was in a very large global enterprise. There were multiple organizations across the group that had RPA initiatives within the global business services, within the functions and business units themselves. And throughout that process, IT was still scrambling to decide whether or not they wanted to insert themselves into it. Of course, that was several years ago. I bet right now they are definitely in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think some of the early days, IT looked at RPA and said it wasn't real
yeah,
coding. It wasn't real coding. So
exactly. So they didn't think that they needed to be involved. So yes, there's definitely a lot of great organizational confusion over who owns digital.
Okay, so then the conversation here on the next slide really gets into the number of vendors there, and you'll see a wide spectrum. And if you know any of these vendors specifically, you'll see a wide spectrum of different sizes and different maturities and different solutions in that across those representation. What I would add to it, I'm not going to talk about individual vendors per se. But I would say that when we did this just a couple of years ago, that we only had 8 vendors on there. Okay, last year we had, or 2 years ago we had, I believe it was 13. Last year we had 18, and this year in 2019 we're looking at 23 vendors that are trying to get our attention to say, hey, we have capabilities in this space. And so when I look at that 23, this will be even more dots on this chart, if you will. But I'd also be cautious and say, listen. In 2 to 3 years, we expect that to be a significant consolidation. We expect that to drop to maybe even like 8 to 10 because of you can't have this many different vendors that are viable in the long term. And so as we talk about what that means into the marketplace, and we talk about what we call our RPA virtuous circle on the next slide. So what's happening here is, and the reason we think there's going to be significant consolidation at the same time, there's significant consolidation and significant opportunity at the same time is we've got this virtuous circle that's moving at warp speed. So we've seen the software platform become more sophisticated, no doubt about that. We see that the client demand is up because there is real value propositions. There is real money to be saved, or real improvements in the business operations. Wall Street and Silicon Valley see this, and so they're injecting tremendous amounts of capital. We've had our first unicorns in this segment come up in the last couple of years here. I think we've got 2 unicorns that are out there, and the unicorns being companies with over $1 billion valuations. So we've gone from companies that were 50 or 100 employees to now have 1,000 or 2,000. I think even some of them are even aiming for like 3,000 employees by the end of this year. That creates another conversation that says, oh, they have lots and lots of money to play with, so getting multiple rounds of capital. And so that gets them into another conversation, well, how to make my platform more sophisticated.
Yeah, if we take UiPath as a specific example, back in 2017, it was only valued at about $140 million, right? In 2018, that they were able to close 2 additional rounds of funding that totaled $265 million, where in March of 2018, it was valued initially at $1.1 billion. And 6 months later, only 6 months later, in November, that valuation in that second round of funding increased to $3 billion, right? So that gives an indication of how fast the segment is moving.
Yeah, and so what we wanted, the point we're trying to make with all this is not to make you experts on RPA, and we could have picked any of the different circles on the digital capability platform. We're just trying to highlight one fast-moving area. Is that as that capital comes in and as those RPAs get more and more penetration inside the enterprises and they get more and more buying centers, they're also looking to make investments in their own platforms. And so they are expanding what we called RPA just a year or two ago is not going to be what you think of RPA in the future. So they're adding in OCR, they're adding in robotics, they're adding in machine learning, they're adding in analytics, or they're adding in natural language processing, either into their core partners or into their overall ecosystems. And some of the leading vendors will sit there and say, well, yeah, we've already done many of those things. And they're probably right. I mean, they are right, but they will be adding additional context and additional capabilities, with the money that they've been able to get from the investment community. So it's going to continue to I would think, continue to expand at warp speed. So from a buying perspective, you got to be looking for this in your organizations in terms of, well, who's buying this in our organization, and is that under control? But then also understand, who are they buying it from? Because when I talked about it expanding to 23 different vendors in 2019, that we will, our next peak matrix will show. Then I also told you, and I'm confident in this projection, that we only have 8 or 10 in the future. We're going to see consolidations, we're going to see acquisitions, we're going to see failures. We're going to see some outright failures in this industry. So you need to make sure that you're looking at each and every one of those vendors. I am not saying that those vendors that were in the bottom left don't have merit. They may have lots of merit. They may have unique value propositions that are set up for your industry process that are very worth taking a look at. But just make sure you have great contracting principles in place, and you have great protections in terms of, if they don't reach the scale they need to survive and they get acquired or bought, make sure that you have the right contracting terms and conditions in place.
Yeah, so sourcing teams really need to be hyper aware of the evolving marketplace to select the right technologies and the right providers to help them navigate through those various external uncertainties that you discussed earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in other industry segments, we've had the consolidation here. We have not had that consolidation, and so the risk of getting on the wrong horse is very much there.
Okay, so from a sourcing perspective, in order to remain competitive through low costs, quick execution, and access to talent, organizations are reviewing their sourcing mix between in-house and outsourcing. They're reviewing their portfolio of service providers, and also, to Michael's point earlier, the pricing models that they're using. So the majority of organizations that we surveyed expect to be making changes to their sourcing mix in 2019. About a third of them are pursuing more outsourcing. About a quarter are moving more work into their in-house centers. But this is just at an overall level. And in some areas, such as contact centers, the expectations for increasing the portfolio of providers that organizations are using can be greater at around 40 to 65% of organizations. And all of these changes also impact the pricing models. If we can flip to the next slide. So currently, service provider revenues are mostly derived from FTEs. Most of the majority of contracts that we see are based on, cost per FTE. But this will shift more towards intellectual property over time as more automation and digital comes in. So this means that the pricing model will need to adjust towards more output or outcome-based pricing rather than FTE-based. By output, we mean cost per transaction. By outcome, that's a little bit more aligned to the business objectives that you have. So as automation slowly replaces the lower level transactional work, we are also seeing that the talent pyramid will start shifting towards a diamond. And knowing that service providers can't be everything to everyone, we are also seeing an increased focus by service providers towards orchestration of those various components that we showed on the digital capability platform, as opposed to just singular types of solutions.
Yeah, so when I look at the pricing model and I think about what's happened here, we've almost come full circle on that. So if you go back into the 80s and 90s, most of the outsourcing contracts and sourcing the third-party contracts were actually, most of them were output-based contracts. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until we got to the labor arbitrage and moving things to India and other low-cost locations, which really happened in 2005 onwards, and those value propositions that we actually started to price things based on FTEs. And so I look at as a value proposition shift to more digital type solutions and really focusing on the outcome or the output. Now, I don't want to go too much on the outcome, but I really want to focus on the output. We're kind of doing back to the future on that, and I think that is a particular win-win situation for where people are focusing on not what are the inputs, but what are the outputs. Mm-hmm. I think outcomes will still be a viable in some certain situations, but they are much more challenging to implement.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So finally, from another study that we conducted late last year, I just wanted to share here some of the key findings that might help you as you're working through your pricing models. So the first is to understand what success looks like for your organization and make sure that your pricing model aligns to that so that you and your service provider are working towards the same objectives. That seems pretty basic, but just recently I was talking to an enterprise client of ours, and they admitted that within their contracts they had different SLAs to what they were measuring internally, which makes it difficult, to achieve what you want if you're not working towards the same targets, right? Second, while all the service providers that we talk to say that they welcome discussions on changing from a traditional FTE-based pricing model to, more outcome or output-based, most of these discussions are actually initiated by enterprises. So despite, the reluctance around this, enterprises who really pursue pricing model changes are still able to capture high impact, whether it's tangible cost savings or greater customer satisfaction or higher provider productivity. So what we're saying to enterprises are, don't be afraid to have these discussions with your service providers. I mean, believe me, they're expecting it. So
yeah, so let me just interject here, Shirley. There's a question coming in here, and I'll make sure we're getting a definition here. So there's a question on what is the difference between output-based and outcome-based pricing models?
Right. So output-based pricing models are cost per transaction, and outcome-based is using more strategic measures around, for example, customer satisfaction or being paid on a percentage of savings that you identify, those kinds of things.
Or increases in revenue. So
yes, exactly.
In a call center, what's your do you get a percentage of the sales that for upsells?
Yes. So outcome-based is definitely a lot more complex because not only do you need to identify the appropriate measures, you need to calibrate them and normalize them to a level that is reasonable, right, to base compensation off of.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, while I conceptually like the outcome pricing models, I also find that they're challenged to implement because the cause and effect. So if you're going to get it, I'm going to do a whole bunch of changes to your digital experience with a vendor or with a client, but is that, and they do see a sales increase, and the vendor says, hey, I want 5% of the increased revenues or the increased whatever the business metric they're challenging or changing. The challenge with that is, was the vendor causing that, or was it also coincidental because they bought a Super Bowl ad that year? And who's going to take the credit for that? And do you take the credit for a project in perpetuity, or you take it for just a year or two, or those all things become very complicated. And that's why I stress the output, which is hey, we've gone for a certain set of outputs. Those are much easier to define in the business context and get cause and effect.
Yep.
For improvement.
So we just talked about really the third point, which is the technology enablers leading to higher impact from adopting output and outcome-based pricing models. And the final kind of point is that along with these pricing model changes, you have to look at the rest of the contract as well. There's clauses that, for example, in the areas of service scope and governance, that will need to be aligned to these new pricing models. Some examples of that, is, we just talked about service performance, right? You would need to look at enhanced SLA targets. You need to have updated efficiency commitments. From a governance point of view, audit and testing rights will also need to be looked at, as well as compliance with other licenses. And another piece of it is IP, right? So who owns your data? Is it you? Is it the service provider? Is it the vendor that they may be leveraging on your behalf to deliver the automation? That all needs to be clearly laid out as you're doing contracting.
So there's a couple questions here related to this. One is, well, let's pick this one here. For service providers, will the total business revenues increase or shrink here? And so I think, let me answer that question in the context of the next slide here. So what we are trying to indicate here, we've talked about the changing landscape and the global services is at another industry is at another inflection point. If you look at the far left, when the value propositions round was operational excellence, you see a set of vendors there: EDS, ProSystem, CSC, IBM, ACS, Capgemini. Those were all very prominent vendors in the 80s and 90s. But if you look at the prominent vendors we had in the 2000s and in the first half, 2010, 2000, even almost up to today, where labor arbitrage was the primary value propositions, you will see that there's virtually no overlap between the first set of vendors and the second set of vendors. And what happened is we saw a number of acquisitions. We saw some mergers happen there. I don't think we saw anybody actually go out of business, but we certainly saw some distressed sales on the first set. We think the similar type thing is going to happen as we move from the labor arbitrage to digital. And so we're not going to sit here and name names today, but we do see some changes to the impact of who's winning and losing right now in the digital world. And so, be conscious of just because you assumed, I think, it's pretty safe to say that Accenture and IBM will probably, we'll go with Accenture for safe, that they've continued to evolve their organization. But some of these others may or may not make that transition. And one of the question will the revenues go up or down? I think the reality is some of these organizations are going to have to shrink. So as they implement digital solutions, they're actually going to get less revenue because people are expecting to see improvements as they move to digital solutions. So if you can put in a series of automations, maybe you can do it with 25% less people, or you can do it faster. I don't know that that's going to be as dramatic as the change when we moved from U.S.-based labor or European-based labor to low-cost locations, but I think there's going to be a certain part of that that's going to have compelling, and you may see some of these vendors significantly impacted. Okay, so the question there really is, are you ready for it? Is your organization thinking about these questions? One of the other things I'd add in here, kind of related to a couple questions that we're seeing in the chat here, is also, have you gone back, and I'll let you answer this one, Shirley. Have you gone back and asked your existing providers, for a discount, or should you?
I certainly think that it's what enterprises are actually doing, and I think it's appropriate, because ultimately, a lot of these kind of contracts are multi-year, right? And we're already seeing with all of these changes that are happening so quickly that your pricing models are becoming quite obsolete. And if you're not getting what you need from those contracts now, then you should go back, no matter where you are in that cycle, to kind of to start having those discussions with your service provider to get more aligned and to ensure that you're getting the best out of that relationship.
Yeah, I think if you've had a services contract out there for, that you negotiated 2 or 3 or 4 years ago,
yeah,
those certainly should be on the reinvestigate potential. And it may or may not be big cost savings, but you certainly should see significant operational improvements. So you should see the service providers being willing to invest in the digital technology so that you can get faster response time. Your accuracy goes up. Those operational metrics that you really care about should be dramatically improving. And I'm not talking about 5 or 10%. I'm talking about if you're doing a catch-up type mode, you should be seeing 25, maybe even 50% improvements in some of these metrics, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and definitely, as you're negotiating new contracts, we are seeing that the term of those contracts are decreasing. So what previously might be a 5 or 6 year contract, now we're looking at 3 years, right, as an average. And I've even talked to enterprises that have only a 1 year commitment.
Yeah, the 1 year is a little short, I think. I think
Yeah.
you gotta be realistic about the cost of. There is a cost of making these changes. This is, in a different webinar setting or different webinar context, I might talk about, the digital is actually, or let's say we really drill down on RPA. I might even suggest that RPA is actually not so much about the technology, but it's actually about the process reengineering. So as you get into these RPA situations, it's easy to get infatuated by the imagery around the robots, and I always remind people that they're really not robots, they're just software. But you can get infatuated with, hey, let's install more automation that way, but the reality is, to make the automations work like you want them to, you've got to really have a business process reengineering conversation. And so that is going to take investment by somebody, whether it's the enterprise buying or the service provider providing those services.
Right.
All right, so let's wrap up here. There's quite a few questions here. We're not going to be able to get to them all. I'm not sure if you want to look at them. We can maybe get 1 or 2 more in here as I wrap up here. So our core viewpoints here are that new digital approaches are changing the way that enterprises are consuming them, consuming business process services, and how providers are delivering them. And these aren't just small changes; these are significant changes that you got to consider. We showed you the digital capability platform. We need to, you should be looking at that and saying, hey, how is my organization approaching this from a holistic standpoint? Don't get infatuated by looking at one specific dot on it. We spent a lot of time talking about RPA, but we could have spent an equal amount of time talking about analytics. We could have spent a lot of time talking about the interaction layer, the chat bots and stuff like that. You can't get focused on one. This has got to be a more holistic view to the client and the employee experiences. And then the 5 key challenges there. We went through those one by one. Happy to review those as you need help with. But we think those are something that's procurement and sourcing organizations should be paying attention to now. And then, if you want to help on a list of vendors, which vendors are the up and comers and why, and what are the risks associated with each vendors, we can certainly put you in touch with the teams that can help you with that. But you should at least be familiar with their names and make your own judgments of what's right for your organization.
Yeah. So just one question I think that we have time for. I see one that says, how is the need of the speed of need in digital affecting the acquisition process? And is procurement processes, changing to meet those business needs? That's a very interesting one,
Yeah, I think you have to look at it. I was doing a webinar with another chief research officer conversation who specialized just in procurement processes. And, he was real high on the conversation of procurement needs to evolve itself so it can help the rest of the business. So, you got to start with the procurement organization being digitally aware itself.
Right.
But they also need to look at it and say, these digital solutions are not necessarily going to be like some of the big projects we had in the past where they were all top-down driven. This is going to be a very democratized process where go back to, hey, you need a credit card, and people in the functions have credit cards, people in the shared services organization have credit cards, people in the IT have credit cards, and people in the biz ops all have credit cards, and they're wielding their credit cards, in ways that people probably never imagined.
Yeah.
And so I go back to my digital disaster. I think digital disasters aren't created because people are doing the wrong things. I think they're just doing things in a way that they're going to regret down the road, but they're really trying hard to do the right thing.
Yeah, and certainly when we're talking to enterprises, quite a few of them have actually approached us and around, should they start adopting, let's say, more agile processes to speed up the cycle times that they have in supporting their businesses. So yes, I think procurement does need to change and evolve to this new kind of reality. The traditional way of taking 3 months to source something probably doesn't make too much sense anymore in some of these digital contexts.
Yeah, and some will take more than 3 months, but you can't assume that you've got that much time to make things happen. Okay, all right, we're going to wrap up right now. It's always important you end on time from an analyst perspective. So we got lots of sources. There's lots of questions, many questions we were not able to get to here, and we'll try to get to those offline. And certainly you can reach out on the previous page. There are email addresses. The presentations will be available. You can reach out to myself or Shirley directly. Check out our blog and check out our related content on this. You can click on that. And then Shirley, you had one more thing you wanted to talk about, a new study alert for looking down the road.
Yes. So one thing that we do want to understand, actually, to the last point around how procurement is structured, perhaps to meet the needs, is that we're looking at the organization models for sourcing and vendor management teams. So we want to learn, what's working, how organizations are structured to meet the business needs, to understand competencies and the responsibilities across roles and teams. So we're in the process right now of finishing up the design of the study, and we would love to have enterprises participate in that. So please reach out to me. My email address is here. So to receive an invitation of the study when it's ready. It probably will launch towards the end of March, and we would love to talk to you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Michael and Shirley, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to download the presentation slides along with an on-demand playback of today's live session. On behalf of the Everest Group and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.